Hey there, today's video is a plea to the US and Saudi governments to end the war in Yemen. I've made it pretty clear that I'm not a fan of either of these governments, but I do firmly believe that ending the war on Yemen is the best thing, not just for the US and Saudi peoples, but for the leaders of these countries as well. Here are 3 reasons why. The fact that Saudi Arabia has failed in Yemen isn't even a question anymore. They invaded in 2015 to make Saleh and the Houthis bend the knee, and it is extraordinary how completely they have failed in that goal. As with other conflicts in the region, this simple fact can be concealed by the way that the conflict looks on a map. Take this recently published depiction from the BBC, for example. It looks like the Saudis are doing great. They control so much of the country that you need a smaller map to see the front lines. Unfortunately, as I explained 2 years ago, this is not a good representation of Yemen's reality. Yemen had emerged from 2 separate and bloody histories as North and South Yemen. There's one very important note here. These countries look to be similarly sized, but they're really not. South Yemen was mostly desert. Much of the population was centered around the port of Aden and other coastal regions. The population of the north has consistently been around 5 or 6 times larger than the population of the south. The south has always had fewer people, and its history of British colonialism and communism gave those people a very different perspective. This difference in population distribution is important to remember when we eventually look at the front lines in Yemen's current war in an upcoming video. After 2 years of fighting, it may look like Saudi Arabia has made some real progress, but in population terms, they really haven't. In the 2 years since that clip, the map has not changed significantly. Saudi and even some US propagandists like to claim that the coalition controls 70 or even 80% of Yemen's territory. They are bragging about controlling largely empty deserts. The one bright spot for the Saudi coalition over the past 2 years has been a push up the western coast of Yemen to the Hodeidah port. The problem here is that this one bright spot was almost completely driven by the UAE, the United Arab Emirates, and in early July, the United Arab Emirates announced that it was withdrawing many of its soldiers from Yemen. It wasn't entirely clear what this meant back then, but it's becoming clearer. Earlier this month, Saudi Arabia's puppet government was kicked even further out of the largest city that the US-Saudi coalition controls. Out of Yemen's 5 biggest cities, Aden was the only one that the US-Saudi-UAE coalition has ever had uncontested control over. But the southern separatists that really control Aden are UAE allies, not Saudi allies. Now that UAE soldiers are pulling out, full-scale fighting has again begun to break out between Aden's real owners and Yemen's internationally recognized Saudi-based puppet government. I actually think that the recent clashes in this southern city have been blown out of proportion a bit. People who've been following the conflict seriously have known for quite some time that the southern separatists were the real power in Aden. In fact, the Saudi puppet government was almost violently kicked out of Aden back in January 2018 as well. I think these clashes are being taken more seriously because people in the United States are finally taking an honest look at this conflict, and what they're seeing isn't very pretty. Houthi control over northern Yemen has gotten more solid as the years have worn on. At the outset of the conflict, they shared control with Yemen's powerful old dictator, Saleh. In late 2017, Saleh picked a fight with the Houthis and lost both his power and his life. The US-Saudi-UAE coalition is a mess. They rely on a range of local power brokers and war profiteers, and numerous parts of its coalition hate the other parts. Despite warring on the Muslim Brotherhood in other countries, the Saudis work with them in Yemen, which the UAE doesn't like. The Saudis are also working with a wide range of unsavory mercenaries, from Al-Qaeda to Sudanese genocidaires and child soldiers. This coalition is only going to get more embarrassing and less effective without the United Arab Emirates. Now, don't get me wrong, there are plenty of people in the north who hate the Houthis, and there are all kinds of tribal, political, economic, social, and even military divisions between the 80+% of Yemenis that live in the north. But compared to their enemies, the Houthis are infinitely more unified and in control. And despite what Mike Pompeo tells you, they are relatively free of outside influence as well. There are many possible factors in the UAE withdrawal, from the need to bring soldiers home for a potential US war against Iran to the sad fact that the UAE has already met most of its imperial goals in Yemen. But I think the most important factor is probably the defection of another major player in this conflict: most of the US government. Donald Trump still supports the US-Saudi war in Yemen, but he's getting more and more lonely. After years of work by activists, both houses of the US Congress now consistently vote against the war. Crucially, there's a solid handful of Trump-supporting Republicans that votes against the war in Yemen and even votes against arms sales to Saudi Arabia as long as the war continues. In April of this year, both houses of Congress voted to utilize the seldom-used War Powers Act to take the U.S. out of the war in Yemen. Trump used the second veto of his presidency to block that motion. But in September, the House and Senate will have to reconcile their versions of the 2020 National Defense Authorization Bill. Trump can't veto that legislation, and it's almost certain to include some provisions against the Saudis and the U.S. war in Yemen. So Trump and the Saudis have a losing war on their hands. Plus, it's one that the US Congress may be about to take away from them. The smart play here is to get out ahead of this, the way that the UAE just did. Abu Dhabi knows that Washington, D.C. will be happy to go back to taking their bribes just as soon as the Yemen pain point is removed. Ending the war in Yemen has always been the right thing to do. But now it's also the best thing for the survival of the Saudi leadership and Donald Trump's kickbacks. Let's get this done. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe and click the bell next to the subscribe button to get updates whenever I upload a video. Thanks.